The morning air in Jerusalem carried a bitter tang of smoke and dust. The city's streets, once vibrant with merchants, children, and song, were now silent under the shadow of Babylonian conquest. Soldiers marched in precision, their polished armor reflecting the rising sun, and in their wake followed young men taken from their homes. Among them was Daniel, a youth of noble lineage, whose eyes reflected both sorrow and a quiet determination. Alongside him were Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his steadfast friends and companions, each sharing his resolve and fear. Bound and escorted across foreign lands, Daniel clung to the teachings of his forefathers, holding fast to the God of Israel despite the uncertainty that lay before them. Babylon loomed in the distance, a city of grand palaces, towering walls, and golden gates. Here, the king, Nebuchadnezzar, sought the finest youths, those without blemish, talented in wisdom, and capable of serving in his royal court. Daniel and his friends, selected from the best families of Judah, would become captives in the empire of men. Upon arrival, they were brought to the care of Ashpenaz, the chief of the eunuchs, who was charged with their education. Babylonian culture was vast, rich, and foreign, and Daniel and his companions were assigned new names to honor the gods of the empire. Daniel became Belteshazzar, Hananiah became Shadrach, Mishael became Meshach, and Azariah became Abednego. Yet in their hearts, their true identity remained, bound to the God of Israel. As part of their training, the king provided food and wine from his table, offerings often defiled by Babylonian customs. Daniel, aware of the law of his God, refused to compromise. He boldly requested permission to eat vegetables and drink water, a simple diet that would honor his faith. Ashpenaz, wary of offending the king, proposed a 10-day trial. At the end, the youths appeared healthier and stronger than all others, and from then on, they were allowed to maintain their chosen diet. God's favor was upon them. Daniel's wisdom and understanding surpassed that of all his peers, and to him alone, God granted the secret gift of interpreting dreams and visions. After 3 years of training, they were presented before Nebuchadnezzar. Their knowledge astonished the king, who appointed them to serve in his court. Nebuchadnezzar, a man of vast ambition, was troubled by a dream that haunted his sleep. He summoned his magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers, demanding they reveal both the dream and its meaning. When they confessed they could not, his anger burned hot, and he decreed that all wise men of Babylon be executed. Daniel, hearing of the king's decree, went to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, and requested time. He and his companions prayed through the night, seeking God's revelation. In a vision, God revealed both the dream and its meaning. Daniel approached the king the next day with courage, recounting the dream. A massive statue of gold, silver, bronze, iron, and clay, each representing successive kingdoms. The head of gold was Babylon, the eternal kingdom of the Most High, would ultimately crush the statue and endure forever. Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face in reverence. Daniel was exalted, promoted, and granted authority over the province of Babylon and chief oversight of all the wise men. Yet, even as the empire prospered under Babylon's might, Daniel remained a servant to God alone, humble in heart despite worldly honor. During Daniel's rise, Nebuchadnezzar constructed a massive golden image and commanded all to bow in worship. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, steadfast in their faith, refused. Enraged, the king ordered them cast into a fiery furnace, hotter than the flames could ever be measured. But as the flames roared, a fourth figure appeared with them, radiant and untouched by the fire. God himself walked among them. The three men emerged unharmed, their clothes unburned, their faith triumphant. Nebuchadnezzar, witnessing the miracle, praised their God, acknowledging his power as supreme over all. Nebuchadnezzar's pride, however, proved his weakness. In time, he boasted that his kingdom and power were due solely to his might. In punishment, God humbled him, and he lost his reason, living among the animals until he acknowledged that the Most High rules over all kingdoms of men. Eventually, his reason restored, Nebuchadnezzar praised God once more. Years later, Belshazzar, his grandson, held a great feast. In drunken arrogance, he desecrated sacred vessels taken from Jerusalem's temple. Suddenly, a hand appeared, writing mysterious words on the wall. None could interpret them. Daniel, called before the king, read the writing, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. The king's reign was judged and found wanting. That very night, Babylon fell to the Medes and Persians, just as Daniel had declared. Under the rule of Darius the Mede, Daniel continued to serve with integrity. Envious officials plotted against him, exploiting the king's decree that no prayer be offered to any god or man except the king for 30 days. Daniel, unwavering, prayed openly to God 3 times a day. The conspirators seized the moment, and Daniel was thrown into the lion's den. The king spent a sleepless night, tormented by concern for Daniel. At dawn, he hurried to the den and called out. Daniel answered, unharmed, for God had sent an angel to shut the mouths of the lions. The king rejoiced, issuing a decree that all should fear and reverence Daniel's God, who delivers and saves. In his later years, Daniel received visions of future kingdoms and the end times. He saw 4 beasts rising from the sea, each representing successive empires, and a ram and goat locked in battle, symbolizing Medo-Persia and Greece. Through these visions, God revealed the ultimate triumph of his kingdom and the coming of a Messiah, a ruler whose dominion would never end. Daniel's prophecies, though mysterious to many, bore witness to God's sovereignty over history, nations, and time itself. Even in exile, Daniel remained a figure of integrity, courage, and wisdom. He navigated treacherous courts, confronted prideful kings, and endured plots against his life. Throughout, he relied not on his own strength, but on the God who watches over his people, faithful and true. His life was a testament that even in a foreign land, among enemies and idols, faithfulness brings wisdom, protection, and ultimate vindication. Daniel's story concludes not merely as a tale of miracles, but as a legacy of unwavering faith, of courage in the face of oppression, of wisdom born from devotion, and of visions that pierce the veil of time. His life reminds all who read it that no matter the kingdom, no matter the fire, and no matter the den of lions, God's hand guides, protects, and triumphs over every challenge.
Nebuchadnezzar rose to his feet, his crown catching the light of the inferno. His voice, filled with shock, rang out across the plain. Were not 3 men tied up and thrown into the fire? He demanded of his advisers. The officials, startled by his tone, nodded quickly. Certainly, O king. 3 men. The king pointed, his hand trembling though he tried to steady it. Look. I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed. And the fourth looks like a son of the gods. The words rippled through the crowd like a thunderclap. Faces turned pale, eyes widened. Men and women strained to see. And there, through the shimmering wall of flame, they saw what the king proclaimed, not 3, but 4 figures moving within the furnace. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego walked freely, their bonds burned away yet their garments untouched. And beside them strode a radiant figure, robed in light, whose very presence made the flames seem to bow. His form was like that of a man, yet more, his face shone with majesty, his steps carried authority beyond mortal kings. The fire that should have consumed them instead became a chamber of glory. The smoke curled around them but did not cling. The heat flared but did not burn. The crowd fell silent, awestruck. Some covered their faces in fear, others wept, sensing the nearness of the divine. Nebuchadnezzar himself staggered back, his pride shaken, his rage drowned in wonder. This was no trick of light, no illusion. This was power greater than his own, a power that made even his golden image seem dull and lifeless. For the first time in years, the king of Babylon trembled. Nebuchadnezzar rose to his feet, his crown catching the light of the inferno. His voice, filled with shock, rang out across the plain. "Were not 3 men tied up and thrown into the fire?" he demanded of his advisers. The officials, startled by his tone, nodded quickly. "Certainly, O king." 3 men. The king pointed, his hand trembling though he tried to steady it. "Look. I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed. And the fourth looks like a son of the gods." The words rippled through the crowd like a thunderclap. Faces turned pale, eyes widened. Men and women strained to see. And there, through the shimmering wall of flame, they saw what the king proclaimed, not 3, but 4 figures moving within the furnace. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego walked freely, their bonds burned away yet their garments untouched. And beside them strode a radiant figure, robed in light, whose very presence made the flames seem to bow. His form was like that of a man, yet more, his face shone with majesty, his steps carried authority beyond mortal kings. The fire that should have consumed them instead became a chamber of glory. The smoke curled around them but did not cling. The heat flared but did not burn. The crowd fell silent, awestruck. Some covered their faces in fear, others wept, sensing the nearness of the divine. Nebuchadnezzar himself staggered back, his pride shaken, his rage drowned in wonder. This was no trick of light, no illusion. This was power greater than his own, a power that made even his golden image seem dull and lifeless. For the first time in years, the king of Babylon trembled. The moment the 3 men vanished into the fiery mouth of the furnace, the plain of Dura erupted in chaos. Some screamed and turned away, unable to watch what seemed to be certain death. Others leaned forward, grim fascination tightening their features. For in their hearts, they both dreaded and relished the sight of men consumed by judgment. The air thundered with the roar of the flames. From within the furnace came no cries, no screams of agony, only the relentless sound of fire devouring fuel. The acrid scent of burning tar and pitch stung the eyes of all who stood near. Nebuchadnezzar sat rigid on his throne, his eyes locked on the furnace. His heart was still pounding with fury, yet beneath his anger a sliver of unease crept. These men had defied him with words so bold, so certain, words that echoed still, "Our God is able to deliver us, but even if he does not, we will not serve your gods." It was defiance unlike any he had ever seen. And now the flames should have silenced it. Minutes passed, though they seemed like hours. The crowd shifted restlessly. The advisers whispered among themselves, congratulating one another for ridding Babylon of troublesome foreigners. But then something stirred within the fire. Nebuchadnezzar's sharp eyes caught movement through the furnace's blazing opening. He leaned forward, gripping the arms of his throne. "Wait," he muttered. "What is this I see?" Chapter 8, The Fourth Man. The moment the 3 men vanished into the fiery mouth of the furnace, the plain of Dura erupted in chaos. Some screamed and turned away, unable to watch what seemed to be certain death. Others leaned forward, grim fascination tightening their features. For in their hearts, they both dreaded and relished the sight of men consumed by judgment. The air thundered with the roar of the flames. From within the furnace came no cries, no screams of agony, only the relentless sound of fire devouring fuel. The acrid scent of burning tar and pitch stung the eyes of all who stood near. Nebuchadnezzar sat rigid on his throne, his eyes locked on the furnace. His heart was still pounding with fury, yet beneath his anger a sliver of unease crept. These men had defied him with words so bold, so certain, words that echoed still, "Our God is able to deliver us, but even if he does not, we will not serve your gods." It was defiance unlike any he had ever seen. And now the flames should have silenced it. Minutes passed, though they seemed like hours. The crowd shifted restlessly. The advisers whispered among themselves, congratulating one another for ridding Babylon of troublesome foreigners. But then something stirred within the fire. Nebuchadnezzar's sharp eyes caught movement through the furnace's blazing opening. He leaned forward, gripping the arms of his throne. Wait, he muttered. What is this I see? Chapter 8, The Fourth Man. Nebuchadnezzar sat upon a throne of carved cedar and overlaid gold. His robe shimmered with jewels, his crown glinted with rays of torchlight. Yet no splendor could mask the storm in his eyes as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were brought before him. The great hall fell silent. Advisors, soldiers, musicians, and nobles all leaned in to hear what would unfold. The three men stood at the foot of the throne, unbowed, their simple garments in stark contrast to the king's glory. Nebuchadnezzar's voice was sharp as steel. Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image I have set up? The question hung in the air like a blade. He continued, his tone dangerous, yet tinged with a grudging respect. I will give you another chance. When you hear the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, then all will be well. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. And what god will be able to rescue you from my hand? The hall gasped. His words were more than a threat, they were a challenge hurled at heaven itself. The three Hebrews did not exchange glances. Their hearts were already decided. Shadrach stepped forward, his voice steady though the air trembled with the king's fury. O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it. He will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, know this, we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. The hall erupted in gasps and whispers. Such defiance was unheard of. Nebuchadnezzar's face twisted, red with rage. His voice rose like thunder. Heat the furnace 7 times hotter than usual, he roared. Bind these men and throw them into the fire. The command rang out, and soldiers leapt to obey. The guards seized the three Hebrews, binding their hands and feet with cords. The crowd pressed back in horror and anticipation, their eyes wide at the spectacle about to unfold. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did not falter. Even bound, their faces were calm, their faith unshaken. For they knew the fire could touch only their bodies, never their souls. The ceremony on the plain of Dura had ended, yet whispers still buzzed like angry bees through the ranks of officials and nobles. While most returned to their tents satisfied that they had fulfilled the king's command, a select group of Babylonian advisors were restless. They had seen something that could not be ignored. 3 men, foreigners, Jews from the land of Judah, had refused to bow. They stood when all others bent low. They remained unmoved when the music rose. Their defiance had been plain for all to see. These officials, long envious of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's position in the kingdom, recognized their opportunity. For years, they had bristled at the thought of exiles ruling in positions of authority. They saw the favor the Hebrews enjoyed and despised it. Now, at last, a path lay open to bring them down. Without delay, they gathered their robes and hurried to the palace. The king was still in Dura, basking in the glow of his golden monument, entertaining nobles and commanders. The advisors approached with the careful flattery of courtiers. "O king, live forever," they said, bowing low. Nebuchadnezzar's eyes, dark and sharp, studied them. "Speak," he commanded. The officials chose their words with care, each phrase laced with both respect and accusation. "O king, you have issued a decree, that all peoples, nations, and men of every language must fall down and worship the golden image you set up. And you declared that whoever does not fall down will be thrown into a blazing furnace." The king nodded, impatient. "This is so." "What of it?" The officials exchanged glances, savoring the moment. "But there are Jews whom you have set over the affairs of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, O king. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up." The words struck like a spark to dry grass. Nebuchadnezzar's pride, already inflamed by his monument, flared into rage. His brows knit, and his voice thundered across the hall. What treachery is this? Do they dare defy me? Bring them before me at once. Messengers were dispatched, guards sent running. The three Hebrews, calm and resolute, were soon summoned from the crowd and led into the throne room. They walked steadily, chains of fear absent from their steps, though they knew the fury they would face. The courtiers drew back, eager to watch. Their trap had been sprung, and the jaws of the king's anger were ready to close. The day arrived. From every province of the empire, people streamed toward the plain of Dura. Caravans rolled across the desert. Governors in fine robes, nobles glittering with jewels, soldiers in polished armor, all converged upon the place where the statue stood. The air was thick with dust and the sound of voices. Thousands upon thousands gathered, their tents dotting the edges of the plain like a festival. At the center loomed the image of gold, towering above all. Its face shone stern and unyielding, a symbol of power none dared to challenge. Trumpets blared. Heralds called for silence. A hush spread through the crowd as the decree was read aloud. People of every nation and language, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and every kind of music, you must fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. The crowd murmured, the weight of the words pressing upon them. The musicians raised their instruments. A moment of silence lingered like the pause before a storm. Then the music began, horns blaring, strings ringing, drums pounding. Instantly, the crowd moved as one. Thousands dropped to their knees, their foreheads pressed to the ground before the statue. Dust rose in clouds as the multitude prostrated themselves in obedience. All bowed, save three. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood tall, their faces calm, their eyes lifted not toward the statue but toward heaven. Around them, the people pressed low, afraid even to glance up. Yet still the three remained upright, unshaken. A ripple of shock spread through those nearest. Whispers hissed like serpents in the dust. Look, they do not bow. Fingers pointed. Eyes widened. Murmurs swelled into a tide of astonishment and outrage. Among the officials, certain men of Babylon watched with cold satisfaction. These were jealous rivals, resentful of the Hebrews' favor in the king's court. Now, at last, they had the weapon they needed. They exchanged knowing looks and hurried from the plain, eager to report to the king. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood unmoved, their hearts steady. The music thundered, the statue loomed, the crowd bowed low, but they would not bend. For their God alone was worthy of worship. And so the stage was set for a confrontation that would shake Babylon to its core. The furnace stood at the edge of the plain, a monstrous kiln used for smelting metals and firing bricks. Its mouth gaped wide, belching flames that licked the sky. Already it roared with heat, but under the king's furious orders, it was stoked even further. Slaves shoveled pitch and tar, feeding the blaze until the air shimmered with waves of heat. Sparks flew like swarms of fireflies. The roar of the flames grew deafening, like a beast awakened in hunger. The crowd gathered at a distance, shielding their faces from the searing wind. Even from afar, the heat pressed against their skin, burning their lungs with every breath. Soldiers, chosen for their strength, stood ready to carry out the sentence. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were dragged forward, their ropes digging into their wrists. Their garments of honor, the robes of administrators in Babylon, were still upon them. They were bound as criminals, yet their dignity remained. The soldiers pushed them closer to the furnace. The heat grew unbearable. Sweat poured down faces, armor smoked as it baked in the fiery air. The crowd gasped as the soldiers strained to lift the three men toward the mouth of the furnace. But before the Hebrews even entered, the fire's fury struck. The flames leapt outward with sudden violence, a blast of heat so fierce it consumed the very soldiers who carried them. The mighty men of Babylon staggered, cried out, and fell dead, their armor clattering to the ground. Into the furnace fell Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, bound, helpless, swallowed by fire. The crowd cried out in shock. The advisers who had accused them smiled with cruel satisfaction, certain their scheme had succeeded. Nebuchadnezzar leaned forward on his throne, eyes fixed upon the blaze, eager to see the defiance of these men consumed. But what the king was about to witness would change him forever. At last, Nebuchadnezzar found his voice. It cracked with both fear and reverence as he called out, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out. Come here." The crowd held its breath as the three men turned and walked from the flames. The radiant fourth figure remained within, vanishing into the fire as silently as he had appeared. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stepped onto the stones before the furnace, their heads lifted high. The crowd surged forward, nobles, satraps, governors, and officials pressing close to see. And amazement spread from face to face, for the men were wholly untouched. Their robes were not scorched, their hair not singed, not even the smell of smoke lingered upon them. It was a miracle undeniable. Nebuchadnezzar descended from his throne, unable to resist the truth burning before his eyes. He circled the men slowly, his jeweled robe sweeping the dust. His voice, once filled with fury, now trembled with awe. "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego," he declared, loud enough for all the nations gathered to hear, "who has sent his angel and rescued his servants." They trusted in him and defied the king's command, and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. The crowd echoed his words, nodding, murmuring agreement. The advisers who had plotted against the Hebrews shrank back, their victory dissolved into ash. Nebuchadnezzar raised his hand for silence, then proclaimed a decree, "Therefore I make this decree, that anyone of any people, nation, or language who says anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut to pieces and their houses turned into ruins, for no other God can save in this way." Cheers rose from the plain, a sound like the crashing of waves. The Hebrews, once condemned, now stood vindicated. Their faith had turned the greatest king on earth into a witness of the Most High. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego exchanged glances. They had not sought glory, nor vengeance, nor power. They had only sought to remain faithful. Yet in their obedience, God had revealed his might. And Babylon itself had been shaken by the flame of his presence. The plain of Dura still shimmered with heat, but it was no longer the furnace that burned hottest, it was the hearts of the crowd, still blazing with awe at what they had witnessed. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood alive, their garments unstained, their faces calm. And all Babylon, from the lowest servant to the highest noble, knew that they had seen something no man could deny: the God of Israel had shown himself mightier than fire. Nebuchadnezzar remained silent for a time, pacing before the furnace. His mind, used to commanding armies and bending nations, reeled at the thought that his power was not absolute. All his victories, his monuments, his gods of gold and stone, none of them could do what he had just seen done. At last, he turned back to the crowd. His voice carried not only the weight of a king but also the wonder of a man who had glimpsed eternity. "Hear me, all peoples, nations, and men of every language gathered here today. The God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego has shown himself mighty. No flame could consume them, no furnace could bind them. He alone is the Most High." He raised his arm, jeweled bracelets glinting in the sun. "Therefore, I decree, whoever speaks against this God shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses shall be laid in ruins. For there is no other God who can save in this way." The proclamation echoed across the plain. The advisers who had conspired against the Hebrews bowed their heads in shame, their victory turned to dust. Soldiers murmured among themselves, struck by fear and reverence. Common folk whispered stories to one another, already carrying the miracle back to the farthest corners of the empire. Nebuchadnezzar then did something no one expected. He stepped down from his platform and approached the three Hebrews directly. His crown gleamed, his robe shimmered, but for once he seemed less a king than a man humbled. "You three," he said, his voice softer, though still laced with awe. "You defied me. Yet you were right to do so, for your God has proven greater than my command. You trusted him even unto death, and he has not failed you." Shadrach inclined his head. "O king, we sought only to honor the God who made heaven and earth. We do not seek our own glory." Meshach added, his tone humble yet firm, "We serve him whether in life or in death. He is faithful, and we are his." Abednego finished, the fire was fierce, but his presence was greater still. Nebuchadnezzar stood in silence for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Then know this, you shall not only live, you shall be honored. From this day forward, your names shall be remembered, and your positions in Babylon strengthened. For through you, all nations have seen the power of the Most High." The king's attendants stepped forward, untying the ropes that still dangled from their wrists. Though the cords were charred, the men's skin beneath was unmarked. The crowd marveled anew. That night, as torches flickered across the plain, St.